World of Warcraft, Tides of Darkness by Aaron Rosenberg. Chapter 3. Khadgar watched quietly from one side of the throne room. Lothar had wanted him present both as a witness and, Khadgar suspected, as a familiar face in the strange land. And Khadgar's own curiosity had compelled him to accept the invitation. But he knew better than to present himself to these men as an equal. Despite the power he now wielded personally, every one of them was a ruler and capable of having him killed in seconds. Besides, Khadgar felt he had been in the center of things too much of late. As a youth, he had been more accustomed to watching and waiting and studying before he acted. It was nice to return to old habits again, if only for a moment. He recognized many of the men present, at least by description. The large, bearish man with thick features and heavy black beard, and the black and gray armor was Gen Greymane. He ruled the southern nation of Gilneas, and Khadgar had heard he was far more clever than his appearance suggested. The tall, slender man with weathered skin and green naval uniform was, of course, Admiral Dalen Proudmoore. He ruled Kulturas, but it was his position as a commander of the world's largest, fiercest navy that made even Terranus treat him as an equal. The quiet, cultured-looking man with grain-brown hair and hazel eyes was Lord Aidan Perronold, master of Altaric. He was glaring at Thoras Trollbane, king of the neighboring Stormgrad, but the tall, gruff Trollbane was ignoring him, his leathers and furs apparently shielding him as well from Perronold's anger as it did from the mountain's fierce weather. Instead, Trollbane's craggy features were turned toward a short, stout man with a snow-white beard and a friendly face. He needed no introduction. Anywhere on the continent, even without his ceremonial robes and staff. Alonzus Fowl was the Archbishop of the Church of the Light, and revered by humans everywhere. Khadgar could see why. He never met Fowl himself, but just watching him created a sense of peace and wisdom. A violet flicker from the corner of his eye distracted Khadgar, and he turned, and struggled not to gape. Davorously thin, with a long, gray-streaked brown beard and mustache, and matching bushy eyebrows, his bald head covered by gold-edged skullcap, was Archmage Antonidas. In all his years in Darlaron, Khadgar had seen the Kirin Tor leader only twice. Once in passing, and once when they informed Khadgar they were sending him to Medivh. To see the Master Wizard now openly taking his place beside other rulers, looking every inch as regal as any monarch, filled Khadgar with awe and a surprising wave of homesickness. He missed Darlaron and found himself wondering if he would ever be able to return to the Wizard City. Perhaps after the wars were over, assuming they survived. Antonidas had been the last to arrive, and when he reached the area just before the dais, Terranus stood and clapped his hands. The sound reverberated and conversations died away as everyone turned their attentions towards the royal host. "Thank you for coming," Terranus began. His voice carried easily across the room. "I know the request seems sudden, but we have matters of grave importance to discuss, and time seems to be of the essence." He paused, then turned to the man standing on the dais beside him. "I present you Anduin Lothar, champion of Stormwind. He has come here as a messenger and more, perhaps a savior. I think it best if I let him tell you himself what he has seen and what we may soon expect ourselves." Lothar stepped forward. Terranus had provided him with fresh clothing, of course, but Lothar had insisted on keeping his armor rather than trading it for undamaged Lordaeron gear. His great sword still rose above one shoulder. In fact, Khadgar was sure many of the monarchs had noticed, but it was the champion's face and words that caught their attention right from the start. For once, Lothar's inability to hide his emotions worked to his advantage, letting the assembled king see the truth in his words. "Your Majesties," Lothar began, "I thank you for attending this meeting and for listening to what I have to say. I am no poet or diplomat, but a warrior. So I will keep my words brief and blunt." He took a deep breath. I must tell you that my home, Stormwind, is no more. Several of the monarchs gasped. Others paled. It fell before a horde of creatures known as the Orcs, Lothar explained. They are a terrible force, as tall as a man and far stronger, with bestial features, green skin and red eyes. This time, no one laughed. This horde appeared recently and began harassing our patrols, Lothar continued. But those were just the raiding parties. When their full force marched, we were astounded. They literally have thousands, tens of thousands of warriors, enough to cover the land like a foul shadow, and they are implacable foes, strong and cruel and merciless. He sighed. We fought them as best we could, but it was not enough. They besieged our city after wreaking havoc across the land itself, and though we held them back for a time, they finally breached our defenses. King Lane died at their hands. Khadgar noticed Lothar did not say how. Perhaps mentioning the half-orc assassin they trusted as a scout and ally would weaken his recounting. Or perhaps Lothar simply did not want to think about it. Khadgar could understand that. He did not want to dwell on the matter either. He had considered Garona a friend, and he had been with her when they saw a vision of it back in Medee's tower. As did most of our nobles, Lothar was continuing. I was charged with seeing his son and as many people to safety as possible, and with warning the rest of the world what had happened. For this horde is not native to our land, not even our world, and they will not be content to control a single continent. They will want the rest of the world as well. Are you saying they are coming here? Proudmoore commented, more of a statement than a question when Lothar paused. Yes. Lothar's simple response sent a ripple of surprise, and perhaps fear, through the room. But Proudmoore nodded. Do they have ships? He asked. I do not know. We had not seen any before now, but we had not seen the horde itself until this past year. He frowned. And if they did not have ships before, they certainly have them now. They raided all along our coastline, and while they sank many vessels, others are simply missing. We can assume, then, that they'll have the means to cross the ocean. Proudmoore did not look surprised by this, and Khadgar guessed the Admiral had already assumed the worst. They could be sailing towards us even now. They can march over the land as well, Trollbane growled. Don't forget that. Aye, they can indeed, Lothar agreed. We first encountered them to the east near the Swamp of Sorrows, and they had crossed all of Azeroth to reach Stormwind. If they turn north, they can cross the Burning Steppes and the mountains and come upon Lordaeron from the south. The south! That was Gang Greymane. They shall not pass us. I will crush any who attempt to landfall on my southern coast. You do not understand. Lothar looked and sounded weary. You have not faced them, and so their numbers and strength are difficult to comprehend. But I tell you now, you cannot stand against them. He faced the assembled monarchs, pride and grief clear on his face. Stormwind's armies were great. He assured them softly. My warriors were trained and seasoned. We had faced the orcs before and defeated them. But this was merely their vanguard. Before the horde itself, we fell like adult children, like old men, like wheat. His voice was flat, his words carrying a ring of grim certainty. They will sweep across the mountains and across your lands and across you. What do you propose we do then? That was Archbishop Fowl, and his calm voice soothed the trampers Khadgar saw ready to erupt. No one liked being called a fool, especially a king, and especially not in front of his peers. We need to band together, Lothar insisted. None of you alone can withstand them, but all of us together might. You say this threat is coming, and I will not dispute it, Paranold commented, his smooth voice cutting across the other kings. And you say we must band together to end the threat. Yet I wondered, have you tried other methods to resolve the matter? Surely these orcs are rational beings. Surely they have some goal in mind. Perhaps we can negotiate with them. Lothar shook his head, his pained expression showing just how foolish he found this discussion. They want this world. Our world. He answered slowly, as if talking to a child. They will not settle for less. We did send messengers, envoys, ambassadors. He smiled a grim, hard smile. Most of them came back in pieces, if they came back at all. Khadgar saw several of the kings murmur to each other, and from their tone suspected they did not understand the danger they all faced. He sighed and began to step forward, wondering if he did, why they would listen to him any more than they'd listened to Lothar. Yet he had to try. Fortunately, another moved forward as well, and though he also wore robes rather than armor, this new figure carried more authority by far. Hear me, Antonidas cried, his voice thin but still powerful. He raised his carved staff high, and light burst from its tip, dazzling the other men. Hear me, he demanded again, and this time all turned and quieted to listen. I have received reports before now of this new menace, the Archmage admitted. The wizards of Azeroth were first intrigued and then terrified by the orcs' appearance, and sent many letters with information and request for aid. He frowned. I fear we did not listen as well as we might have. We appreciated their danger, but thought the orcs little more than local nuisance, confined to that continent. It seems we were wrong. But I tell you that they are dangerous. Many I respect have confirmed this. We disregard the champion's word at our own peril. They're dangerous. Why did the wizards there not deal with them? Greymane demanded. Why did they not use their magics to end the threat? Because the orcs possess magics of their own, Antonidas countered. Potent magic. Most of their warlocks are weaker than our own wizards, at least from what my followers reported. Yet they have far greater numbers and can work in unison. Something my own brethren have never found easy. Khadgar was sure he heard some bitterness in the old Archmage's voice, and understood it well. If there was one thing every member of the Kirin Tor valued, it was his independence. Getting even two wizards to work together was difficult enough. The thought of managing more than that was almost beyond imagination. Our wizards did fight back, Lothar explained. They helped turn the tide of several battles. But the Archmage is correct. We lacked the numbers to stand against them magically as well as physically. For every orc spellcaster killed, another rose to take his place, and two more besides him. And they traveled with raiding parties and smaller armies to protect them from more mundane dangers, lending their magics to increase the power of the warriors around them. He frowned. Our greatest wizard, Medivh, fell to the Horde's darkness. Most of our other wizards were lost as well. Do not think magic alone will turn them back. Khadgar noticed that Lothar did not mention how or why Medivh had died, and appreciated the warrior's tactic. This was not the place for such revelations. He did not miss the sharp glance Antonidas directed his way, however, and suppressed a sigh. At some point soon, the ruling council of the Kirin Tor would demand a full explanation. Khadgar knew they would not be satisfied with anything less than the truth, and he suspected withholding anything could prove deadly to them all, since it tied so closely to the Horde's presence and early activities. I find it strange. Paranoid soft purr cut through the conversation again. That a stranger to our shores should be so concerned for our survival. He glanced at Lothar with what looked suspiciously like a smirk, and Khadgar resisted the urge to set the oily king's beard alight. Forgive me for treading upon fresh wounds, sir, but your own kingdom is gone. Your king dead, your prince little more than a boy, your lands overrun, is that not so? Lothar nodded, grinding his teeth, presumably to keep from snapping the arrogant king's head off. You have brought word of this threat to us, for which we are grateful. Yet you speak reportedly of what we must do, how we must unite. He made a great show of looking around the chamber. Varian was not there. Ternus has taken him in, treating the still-shaken prince as a member of his own household, and both he and Lothar had agreed that the boy should not have to deal with additional scrutiny right now. I do not see anyone else from your kingdom here, and you have said yourself that the prince is but a boy and the land is conquered territory. If we were to consider your suggestion and unite, what could you possibly add to the assembly beyond your own martial prowess, of course? Lothar opened his mouth to respond, fury evident in every feature, but he was cut off again by King Ternus, surprisingly enough. I will not have you insult my guest. Have my guest insulted so, Lordaeron's ruler announced, the steel plain in his voice. He has brought us the news, a great personal peril, and has shown nothing but honor and compassion despite his own grief. Perinold nodded and half bowed, a silent if mocking apology. Further, you're wrong to think him alone or invaluable, Ternus continued. Prince Varian Rin is now my honored guest, and will be so until such time as he chooses to depart. I pledge myself to aiding him in regaining his kingdom. Several other monarchs murmured at that, and Khadgar knew what they were thinking. Ternus had just renounced any claims he might make to Stormwind and warned the other kings that Varian had his support. All in a single statement. It was a clever move, and his respect for Lordaeron's king rose still higher. So Lothar has brought with him others from his kingdom, Ternus concluded, including some soldiers. While their numbers are not significant, when compared to the threat we face, their experience in dealing with the orcs firsthand could be invaluable. Many more still wonder what it was Stormwind. Many more still wonder what was Stormwind, confused and unguided. These may rally upon hearing their champion's call, giving us additional numbers. Lothar himself is a seasoned commander and tactician, and I have nothing but the utmost respect for his personal abilities. He paused and glanced at Lothar in what looked curiously like a question. Khadgar was intrigued to see his companion nod. The champion and the king had met several times while waiting for the other monarchs to arrive, and Khadgar had not been privy to all their discussions. But now he wondered what exactly he had missed. Finally, there was the question of his being a stranger. Tyrannus smiled. Though Lothar himself has not graced this continent with his presence before now, he is far from a stranger, for he has strong ties to this land and to our own kingdoms. For he is one of the Arathi bloodline, indeed, the last of their noble line, and thus has as much right to speak at this council as any of us. The revelation caused a stir among the other kings, and Khadgar also looked at his companion with new eyes. An Arathi. He had heard of Anathor, of course, as everyone in Lordaeron. It had been the first nation on the continent long ago, and the people there had formed strong ties with the elves. Together, the two races had fought off the had fought. Together, the two races had fought against a massive troll army at the foot of the Alterac Mountains. And together, the two races broke the troll threat and shattered the troll nation forever. The Arathorian Empire had prospered and expanded before finally, years later, collapsing into smaller nations that cover the continent today. The Anathar capital, Storm, had been abandoned for the lusher northern lands, and the last of the Arathi had disappeared. Some stories claim they had gone south past Khazmodan into the wilderness of Azeroth. Storm had become the center of Stormgrad, Trollbane's domain. "It is true," Lothar announced in ringing tones, his eyes daring any man to call him a liar. "I descended from King Thoradin, the founder of Anathor. My family settled in Azeroth after an empire collapsed, and founded a new nation there, which became known as Stormwind." "So you have come to claim sovereignty over us?" Greymane demanded, though his face showed he did not believe it. "No!" Lothar assured him. "My ancestors surrendered any claim upon Lordaeron long ago, when they chose to depart. But I still have ties to this land, which my people helped conquer and civilize. And he can still call upon his ancient pact for aid," Tyrannus pointed out. "The elves swore to support Thoradin and his line in times of need. They will still honor that commitment." That drew apprehensive glances and whispers from several, and Khadgar nodded. Suddenly Lothar was more than just a warrior or even a commander in their eyes. Now he was a potential ambassador to the elves, and if that ancient magic-wielding race chose to ally with them, suddenly the Horde did not seem nearly as unstoppable. "This is a great deal to take in," Paramore commented dryly. "Perhaps we should give ourselves time to consider all we have heard and all that must be done to protect our lands from this new threat." "Agreed," Tyrannus said, not even bothering to ask the others their opinion. "Food has been set out in the dining hall, and I invite you all to join me. Not as kings, but as neighbors and friends. Let us not discuss this matter over food, but mull it to ourselves, that we may approach it more clearly after we have digested both the food and the danger that lies before us." Khadgar shook his head as the monarchs nodded and began moving towards the door. Paranoid was a wily one, that was certain. He had seen that his fellow ruler's support was swinging towards Lothar, and had found a way to regroup. Khadgar expected that Alterac King would announce after lunch that he had reconsidered, and that clearly Lothar's idea had merit. That way, he could avoid losing face or being forced into a junior position in the upcoming alliance, which it seemed the kings would likely agree upon soon. As he followed the monarchs from the room, Khadgar noticed a movement above and off to one side. Turning, he caught a brief glimpse of two heads peeking out from one of the upper balconies. One was dark-haired and solemn, and he recognized Prince Varian. Of course, the Stormwind heir would want to know what took place in the meeting. The second head was fair-haired and young, a mere boy, standing back far enough that Varian probably did not recognize he had a shadow. The boy saw him looking and grinned, before disappearing behind the balcony's black back curtain. So Khadgar thought to himself, young Prince Arthas also wanted to know what his father and the others are planning. And why not? All Lordaeron would be his one day, provided they could keep the Horde from overrunning it. Chapter 4. Doomhammer was speaking with one of his lieutenants, Ren Blackhand of the Blacktooth Grin clan, when a scout came running up. Though the Orc warriors clearly had news to import, he stopped several paces from them and waited, catching his breath until Doomhammer glanced in his direction and nodded. "Trolls," the Orc scout announced, still gasping. "Forest trolls. A full party by the looks of it." "Trolls?" Ren laughed. "What are they attacking us? I thought they were smarter than ogres, not dumber." Doomhammer had to agree. The one time he had encountered forest trolls, he had been impressed and a little disquieted by their cunning. Though the trolls were taller than orcs and were leaner and more agile, particularly in the forests, which made them a significant threat in such places. Crossing the waters to reach this island, however, did not match what he had seen of their behavior. But the scout was shaking his head. "Not attacking. They're on the mainland and they've been captured," he grinned. "By humans." That got Doomhammer's attention. "Where?" he demanded. "Not far from the shore, along the hills, just within the forest," the scout answered promptly. "They were marching west, though it was slow going for them." "How many?" "Close to 40 humans," the scout replied. 10 trolls." Doomhammer nodded and turned back to Ren. "Gather your strongest warriors," he insisted, "and quickly. You leave at once." He glowered at the Blacktooth Grin leader. "Be clear, however," he warned, "that this is a raiding party only. You are to rescue the trolls and bring them back here with you. Avoid being seen as much as possible and kill any who spy on you. I will not have our battle plans ruined because you were careless." The chieftain nodded and departed without a word, moving quickly toward a warrior lounging nearby. Ren began barking orders even before he had reached the other orc, and the warrior quickly straightened, nodded, and ran off, no doubt seeking his fellow Doom fellows. Doomhammer waited impatiently, signaling the scouts to wait as well. His hand flexed in anticipation, but his mind was far away, back many months to his previous encounter with the trolls. Blackhand had shocked the other orc clans back in their homeworld by declaring his intent to ally with the ogres. It had proven a useful partnership, the monstrous creatures lending considerable strength to their horde, but still it went against the grain. Thus, many had been skeptical when they had heard reports of similar creatures here in this new lush world, and Blackhand announced they would win these creatures to their war banner as well. He had sent Doomhammer and a handful of other Blackrock warriors to make contact, a sign of trust he placed in his young second. Even now, Doomhammer felt guilty about that, for he had betrayed his war chief's trust and turned on him, killing him and taking his place as leader. Still, it was the way of the clans, and Blackhand had been leading their people to their own death and destruction. Doomhammer had been forced to act in order to save them. He reached back and down, running his fingers along the smooth stone head of his hammer where it hung across his back, the handle high over his shoulder, and the head down beside his thigh. Long ago, Shaman had prophesied that the mighty weapon would one day see the salvation of the people. They had also said, however, that the wielder who saved them would also doom them, and that he would be the last of the Doomhammer line. Doomhammer wondered about that many times, and even more since he had become war chief and leader of the Horde. Had his taking control meant their people's salvation? He certainly felt that to be the case. But did that mean he also destined to doom them afterwards? And that his line would end with him? He hoped not. At that time, however, Doomhammer had not been concerned with such matters. He still trusted Blackhand, at least the Orcs' leaders' loyalty to their people, and intended to see them masters of this world, and still followed the war chief's orders, though he did his best to moderate Blackhand's love of unnecessary violence. Not that Doomhammer shrank away from combat, and as with most Orc warriors, he delighted in the exhilaration and thrill of battle. But there were times, too, when too much force could actually reduce the value of victory. This mission, however, had involved communication rather than warfare, and Doomhammer had been intrigued and honored, and perhaps deep down even a little frightened. Thus far, they had encountered only humans on this new world, and one or two of the diminutive but mighty creatures called dwarves. If this world had ogres, however, the Horde could find itself with a more powerful enemy than they had not seen. It took 2 weeks before Doomhammer finally encountered a troll. He and his warriors wandered through the forest where a scout had seen one, making no effort to conceal themselves. As the time passed, they had become more convinced the scout had lied, or simply been mistaken, jumping at shadows and then concocting a story to cover his own cowardice. Then, one night, just as twilight stretched across the land and threw long shadows under the trees, a figure swung down from the branches high above, dropping silently to the ground just beyond the orc's campfire. Another appeared an instant later, then another, until the orcs found themselves surrounded by 6 of the silent, shadowy figures. At first, Doomhammer thought the scout had been correct, that they were facing ogres. These were slightly smaller and moved with a silence and grace he had never seen the behemoths possess before. But then a ray of fading sunlight struck one of the creatures as it stalked forward, and Doomhammer saw its skin was green. As green as his own, as green as the leaves on the tree. That explained why they had not noticed the creatures before. The correlation allowed them to blend into the foliage, especially if they moved through the branches, as these evidently had. I also saw that the creatures were taller than he was and leaner than an ogre, more proportioned, lacking the overlong arms and oversized head and massive head of these creatures, and looked at the approaching figure, gave him firelight glistening in the dark eyes as it extended a spear to prod at Doomhammer. Showed a certain intelligence as well. "We are not foes," Doomhammer shouted, his cry splitting the quiet night. He battered the spear aside with one hand, noting as he did that the head was chipped stone and looked very sharp. "I seek your leader." A rumble came from the creatures then, and after an instant, Doomhammer realized it was laughter. "What you be wanting with our leader, morsel?" the lead creature replied, its mouth spitting in a monstrous grin. They had tusks as well, Doomhammer saw, though longer and thicker than his own, and more blunt from the looks of them. He also noted the creature's hair, which rose in a dark crest above his head. Surely that look was not natural, meaning these creatures groomed themselves. Definitely not mere beasts, then. "I'd speak with him on behalf of my own leader," Doomhammer replied. He kept his hands at his side, open to show he carried no weapon, yet he was wary. He would be a fool not to be. This was fortunate, for the creature laughed again. "We be no speaking with morsels," it replied. "We be eating them." And it thrust its spear, no longer a questioning prod, but a hard, swift motion that would have gutted Doomhammer as easily as he might have speared a fish, if he stood still for the blow. Instead, he twisted away, pulling his hammer free from his back, and bellowed a war cry. The shout seemed to startle the creature, which paused in the act of withdrawing its weapon for a second attack. Doomhammer did not give it time to recover. He leaped forward, hammer swinging hard, and smashed one of the creature's legs full in the knee. The creature toppled with a howl of pain, chuckling, clutching the shattered limb, and Doomhammer swung again, a mighty overhand blow that crushed the creature's skull. "I say again, I seek your leader," he shouted, turning to face the other creatures who had not moved during the quick fight. "Take me to him, or I shall kill the rest of you and seek others more willing." He raised his hammer in emphasis, knowing from long experience the sight of its black stone head dripping with fresh blood and matted hair and bone was enough to unnerve most foes. The gesture worked. The other creatures backed away a step, raising their weapons high to show they were not attacking. Then one stepped around the others and approached him. The one's hair was braided rather than cut, in a stiff crest, and it wore a necklace of bone around his neck. "You be wishing to speak to Zul'jin?" the creature asked. Doomhammer nodded, assuming that this was either the name or the title of their leader. "I'll be bringing him here," the creature offered. It turned away and disappeared into the shadows without a sound, leaving its four companions behind. They glanced at each other and at the orcs, clearly not sure what to do now. "We shall wait," Doomhammer announced calmly, both to them and his own warriors. He set the head of his hammer on the ground and leaned on the long handle, alert but unconcerned. When they saw he was not attacking, the creatures relaxed slightly, lowering their own weapons as well. One even sprawled on the ground, though his eyes tracked the orc's every movement. "What are you called?" Doomhammer asked that one after several minutes. "I am Kurten," the creature replied. "Orgrim Doomhammer," Doomhammer indicated himself with a thumb. "We are orcs of the Black Rock land. What are your people?" "We be forest trolls," came the surprised answer, as if Kurten did not believe they did not know. "A Mane tribe." Doomhammer nodded. Forest trolls. And they had tribes, which meant they were civilized. Much, much more than ogres. For the first time, he found himself thinking Blackhand's idea might be wise. These creatures seemed more like orcs than ogres, despite their size and strength. What allies they would make. And they were native to this world, which meant they would know its geography, its inhabitants, and its dangers. An hour passed, then. Without warning, shadows separated from the trees and moved forward on large, silent feet, becoming the troll who had left and three others. "You be wanting Zul'jin?" one of them demanded, stepping close enough for Doomhammer to see the braid beads and bits of metal dangling from his long braids. "I'd be here." Zul'jin was even taller than the other orcs and leaner. He wore some sort of heavy cloth wrapped around his waist and groin, and an open vest of heavy leather. A thick scarf was wrapped around his neck and covered his face up to the nose, giving him a sinister appearance. This close, Doomhammer could also see that the troll's skin was furred. After a second, he realized it looked like moss. The trolls were green because they were covered in moss? What odd new creatures they are. "Yes, I am Doomhammer, and yes, I would speak with you." Doomhammer looked up at the forest troll leader, refusing to show any fear. "My leader, Blackrock rules the orc horde. No doubt you have seen our people moving through the forest." Zul'jin nodded. "We be seeing you, crushing through trees, yeah. Be clumsier than the humans," he commented. "Stronger though, and armed for battle. What you be wanting with us?" Even behind the scarf, Doomhammer could see the troll grin, and it was not a pleasant expression. "You want our forest, yeah? You be fighting us for 'em, then." His hand dropped to his sides, and the twin axes that hung there. And you be losing. Doomhammer suspected the troll leader was right too. The horde significantly outnumbered them, of course, but if all the forest trolls were as strong and silent as these, they could strike from anywhere and disappear again. They could cut down any orcs entering this place, and the horde would not be able to move in large force through the trees to combat the attack. Fortunately, this was not their goal. "We do not want your forests," Doomhammer assured the troll leader. "We want your strength. We plan to conquer this world, and we would have you beside us as allies." Zul'jin frowned. "Allies? Why? What would we gain?" "What would you want?" One of the other trolls said something in a strange hissing language, and Zul'jin cut him off with a sharp reply. "We need nothing, ya," he answered finally, decisively. "We have our forest. None dare intrude here, save only the accursed elves, and those we'd be handling ourselves." "Are you sure?" Doomhammer asked, sensing a plausible opening. "These elves, they are a race unto themselves, a mighty one?" "Mighty, the troll agreed, grubbily. "But we be killing them since ancient times, and when they first came to this land, we needed no help with them." "Why pick them off one by one, though?" Doomhammer asked. "Why not march on their home and destroy them utterly? We could aid you. With a horde behind you, we could crush the elves once and for all, and truly hold the forest without contest." Zul'jin seemed to consider that for a moment. Doomhammer dared to hope the lean forest troll would agree, but finally shook his head. "We fight the elves ourselves," he explained. "We be needing no help, and would not be waiting on the rest of the world, not anymore. So fighting others would not be giving us anything." Doomhammer sighed. He could see the forest troll's mind was set, and he guessed that pushing the point would only antagonize him. "I understand," he said, at last. "My leader will be disappointed, as am I. But I respect your decision." Zul'jin nodded. "Go in peace, Orc," he whispered, already stepping back towards the shadow. "No troll be hindering you." "Yeah." Then he was gone, and the other forest trolls with him. Blackhand had indeed been disappointed, and the war chief had bellowed at Doomhammer and the others about failing their mission. But he calmed down soon enough and agreed with Doomhammer's own assessment that pushing the trolls might have made them enemies instead of neutral parties, and that they did not wish to do. Doomhammer still regretted the troll leader's decision. However, he had instructed his scouts to watch for trolls any time they entered or even passed near the forest, and now that watching had perhaps paid off. Doomhammer watched as the two boats beseeched upon the island's north shore. Ren leaped ashore at once, followed more slowly by a troll whose hair was knotted into braids. A long scarf wrapped around the troll's neck and lower face, and Doomhammer grinned with delight. It was Zul'jin himself. "They were pinned and chained," Ren reported, stopping only a few feet from where Doomhammer stood. "The humans were careless, assuming the only threat in the forest was the one they had already captured." The black-toothed grin chieftain laughed. "No one saw us. No one who saw us lived." "Good." They watched as the troll leader approached. He looked the same as last time they had met. Doomhammer could tell from the troll's expression that he remembered their encounter well. "Your warriors saved us," the forest troll acknowledged, stepping up beside Doomhammer and giving him a nod and greeting among equals. "There were too many, and unused torches to hold at bay." Doomhammer nodded. I am pleased to aid a fellow warrior, he said. When I heard you had been captured, I sent my warriors at once. Zul'jin grinned. Your leader be sending you? I am leader now, Doomhammer replied, his own grin widening. The Control considered this. Your horde still be seeking to conquer the world, yeah? He asked finally. Doomhammer nodded, not daring to speak. We be aiding you then, Zul'jin announced after a moment, as you aided us, allies. He extended his hand. Allies! Doomhammer clasped it. His mind was already a whirl with possibilities between the trolls and the Horde and the new forces Zoohead was binding to the Horde's will. Nothing would stand in their way.